The ash fell like gray snow across the volcanic plains of Ashfall. Nora Webb pulled her thermal cloak tighter and cursed her own stubbornness. The weather station had warned about the incoming storm, but she had insisted on collecting one more soil sample. Now she was paying for that decision. She found shelter beneath a rocky overhang and pressed her back against the warm stone. The wind screamed past the opening, carrying clouds of fine ash that would shred unprotected lungs in minutes. Her cloak's filtration system hummed softly, keeping her alive while the world outside tried to kill her. Nora had been on Ashfall for 8 months now. She was a xenobiologist, one of 12 humans stationed at the small research outpost. Their mission was simple: study the planet, learn about its ecosystem, and most importantly, maintain peaceful relations with the Skirith. The Skirath were dragon-like beings who had lived on Ashfall for thousands of years. They stood twice as tall as humans, with scales that shimmered like molten metal and eyes that glowed with inner fire. They could breathe superheated plasma and fly through volcanic storms that would cook a human alive. They tolerated the human presence on their world, but they did not trust the soft-skinned aliens from Earth. Nora understood their caution. Humans had a complicated history with other species, but she believed that understanding could grow from patience and respect. Something moved against her leg. Nora froze. Her hand went to the small knife at her belt. Ashfall had predators that could slip through cracks in the rock, creatures that hunted by heat's signature. She prepared to defend herself. Then she felt it again, not an attack. Something small pressing against her calf, seeking warmth beneath the edge of her cloak. Slowly, carefully, Nora lifted the fabric. 3 pairs of eyes looked up at her. They glowed softly in the darkness, like embers in a dying fire. 3 small creatures, no larger than house cats, huddled together against her boots. Their scales were still soft and flexible, not yet hardened into the armor that adult Skirith wore. Their wings were folded tight against their bodies, too weak to carry them through the storm outside. Hatchlings, Skirith hatchlings. Nora's heart began to pound. She knew the protocols. The Skirith were fiercely protective of their young. No human had ever been permitted to touch a hatchling. The punishment for such contact was not specified in any treaty, because no one wanted to imagine what it might be. She should push them away. She should report this immediately. She should do anything except what her instincts were screaming at her to do. The smallest hatchling, a pale gold creature with eyes like sunrise, crawled forward and pressed itself against her ankle. It was shaking. Not from cold, because Skirith generated their own heat. It was shaking from fear. Nora made her choice. She opened her cloak and let them in. The 3 hatchlings scrambled up her legs and burrowed against her torso. She felt their small claws grip her clothing, felt their warm bodies press against her ribs. The gold one found a spot near her heart and went still, listening to the steady rhythm of her pulse. Nora wrapped the cloak around all of them and leaned back against the rock. She did not know their names. She did not know how they had become separated from their clan. She did not know if they understood a single word she said. But she spoke to them anyway because that was what humans did when small creatures were afraid. She told them about Earth. She told them about the blue oceans and green forests, about snow that fell white instead of gray, about a yellow sun that did not hide behind clouds of ash. She told them about her childhood home in a place called Norway, where the winters were long and dark and people gathered around fires to share stories. The hatchlings listened. Whether they understood or not, her voice seemed to calm them. The shaking stopped. Their breathing slowed. One by one, they fell asleep against her warmth. The storm raged for 5 hours. Nora did not sleep. She watched the ash swirl past the overhang and thought about what she had done. She had broken the most important rule of human-Skirith relations. She had touched their children. When the wind finally died, she faced a new problem. The hatchlings were weak. Their wings could not carry them, and the volcanic plains stretched for kilometers in every direction. Predators would be emerging from their burrows, hungry after the storm. She could leave them here and report their location. That was the safe choice, the correct choice. The gold hatchling shifted in its sleep and made a small sound almost like a purr. Its claws tightened on her shirt, holding on even in dreams. Nora stood up carefully. She adjusted her cloak to hide the 3 small bodies pressed against her chest. Then she began walking back toward the research station, carrying a secret that could destroy everything humans had built on this world. She did not look back. She did not hesitate. Some choices once made could not be unmade. And some bonds, once formed, could not be broken. Nora's quarters at the research station were small but private. That privacy had never mattered much before. Now it meant everything. She locked the door behind her and carefully opened her cloak. 3 hatchlings tumbled onto her bed, blinking in the artificial light. They looked around with wide eyes, taking in the strange human environment. The walls were smooth and pale. The air smelled different. Everything was wrong. The dark blue hatchling, the largest of the 3, puffed up its chest and let out a tiny growl. It was trying to be brave, trying to protect its siblings from this alien place. Nora knelt beside the bed and held out her hand, palm up. She waited. The blue one sniffed her fingers. Then slowly it pressed its snout against her palm. The growling stopped. She named them in her mind. The blue one was Riss because it made a hissing sound when it was unsure. The silver-gray one was Kip because it moved in quick little jumps. And the gold one, the smallest, was Bryn because it reminded her of a word from Old Norwegian that meant armor or protection. Kip had a torn wing membrane. Nora examined it carefully under a light. The tear was clean, probably from flying debris during the storm. It would heal, but not for several days. Until then, the hatchlings could not fly. She could not return them yet. That was what she told herself. It was not safe. She was protecting them. But part of her knew the truth. Part of her simply did not want to let them go. Over the next 2 days, Nora learned the rhythm of caring for 3 baby dragons. They ate constantly, small portions of synthesized protein that she modified to match Skirith dietary needs. They slept in a nest she made from thermal blankets in her storage locker. They followed her around the room like ducklings following their mother. Riss was always the first to investigate anything new. He would approach strange objects with his head low and his wings half spread, ready to fight or flee. Kip watched from a distance, studying patterns and movements, learning without taking risks. And Bryn stayed close to Nora at all times, sleeping only when she could hear the human's heartbeat. They were intelligent, more intelligent than Nora had expected. They understood when she needed them to be quiet. They hid in the storage locker when someone knocked on her door. They learned which sounds meant food and which sounds meant danger. But keeping them secret was becoming difficult. Director Hensley noticed first. He was a sharp man with gray hair and tired eyes, responsible for the safety of every human on Ashfall. He watched Nora skip meals. He saw her requisitioning extra protein supplements. He noticed the dark circles under her eyes. He said nothing directly. But his watching made her nervous. Then the Skirith came. Nora was in the common room when the alert sounded. A Skirith delegation had arrived at the station's main gate. She watched through the window as a massive warrior landed on the volcanic rock, his scales the color of dried blood. His name was Darrow, and he was not interested in diplomacy. The hatchlings had been missing for 3 days. 3 hatchlings from the clan of Elder Mevin, one of the most respected Skirith on Ashfall. Darrow believed the humans had taken them. He demanded to search the station. Director Hensley refused. He insisted the station had nothing to hide. He promised to assist in the search of the volcanic plains. He was calm and professional and completely unaware that the missing hatchlings were sleeping in a storage locker 50 meters away. Darrow's eyes swept across the gathered humans. When they passed over Nora, she felt her blood freeze. There was hatred in that gaze, old hatred. The kind that waited for an excuse to become violence. The Skirith left without their answers. But Darrow promised to return. He promised that if the hatchlings were not found, humans would pay the price. That night, Nora lay awake in her quarters. Riss was curled at her feet. Kip was perched on her desk, watching the door. Bryn was pressed against her chest, rising and falling with each breath. She had to return them. She knew that. Every hour she waited made the situation worse. But Kip's wing was not healed. And the Skirith were angry. And she was afraid of what might happen if they discovered what she had done. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep. She woke to the sound of her door sliding open. The lock had been overridden. Riss was gone. Nora threw off her blankets and ran into the corridor, her heart pounding. She had to find him before anyone else did. She had to bring him back. But she was already too late. The medical bay was bright and cold. Nora found Riss on an examination table, surrounded by 3 humans who looked like they had discovered an alien artifact. Which in a way they had it. Dr. Yusuf was holding a scanner, his hands trembling slightly. His assistant stood frozen by the door, and Lieutenant Carver, the station security officer, had his hand resting on his sidearm like he expected the small dragon to attack. Rhys saw Nora and chirped. It was a happy sound, a greeting. He tried to jump toward her, but Dr. Yusuf held him in place. Everyone in the room turned to look at her. There was no point in lying. The truth was written on Rhys's face, in the way he strained toward her, in the way his whole body relaxed when she stepped closer. Nora told them everything. The storm. The hatchlings seeking shelter. Her decision to keep them hidden. As she spoke, she watched their expressions shift from confusion to disbelief to something that looked almost like wonder. Director Hensley arrived before she finished. He listened without interrupting. When she was done, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked to see the others. Nora brought him to her quarters. Kip and Bryn were huddled in the storage locker, frightened by the noise and the strange smells. When Bryn saw Nora, she scrambled out and climbed up to her shoulder, pressing against her neck. Hensley watched this with an expression Nora could not read. Then he said something she did not expect. He gave her 12 hours. 12 hours to figure out how to return the hatchlings without starting a war. The Skirath arrived at dawn. Elder Mevin came herself, which was either a good sign or a very bad one. She was ancient by Skirath standards, her scales faded to the color of old copper, her eyes holding the weight of 300 years. She was accompanied by Darrow and 6 warriors, all of them armed with the ceremonial blades that Skirath used for matters of honor. The humans gathered in the station's main hall. Nora stood slightly apart from the others, her cloak wrapped around her. Beneath the fabric, 3 small bodies pressed against her warmth. Mevin spoke first. Her voice was deep and resonant, like stones grinding together. She had traced the thermal signatures of her missing hatchlings to this place. She demanded their return. Nora stepped forward. She felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Skirath and human alike watched as she knelt on the cold floor and opened her cloak. The 3 hatchlings blinked in the sudden light. Rhys raised his head and looked at the massive Skirath with curiosity rather than fear. Kip pressed closer to Nora's leg. And Bryn did not move at all, staying tucked against the human's chest. Mevin took a step toward them. Bryn hissed. The sound was small, almost ridiculous coming from such a tiny creature, but it stopped Mevin in her tracks. The ancient Skirath stared at the gold hatchling at the way it positioned itself between her and the human. Rhys joined his sister. Then Kip, despite his fear, crawled in front of Nora and spread his damaged wings in a protective stance. 3 hatchlings, defending a human from their own kind. Darrow broke the silence. He called it corruption. He said the human had poisoned their minds, twisted their instincts. He demanded that Nora be executed and the hatchlings taken for reconditioning. Mevin raised one massive claw, and Darrow fell silent. The elder approached slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. She lowered her great head until her eyes were level with Nora's. This close, Nora could see the patterns in her scales, the scars from old battles, the wisdom of centuries. Mevin asked one question. She asked what Nora had done to make them love her. Nora thought about the storm. She thought about 3 frightened creatures seeking shelter. She thought about the choice she had made, to open her cloak instead of pushing them away. She gave the only answer she had. She had kept them warm. Mevin was still for a long moment. Then she turned to address the assembled Skirath. She spoke in their own language, sounds that Nora could not understand. But she saw Darrow's expression change from anger to disbelief. When Mevin turned back to the humans, her voice had softened. She said there would be a trial. The human had touched sacred young. This could not be ignored. But the hatchlings had spoken with their actions. They had chosen to protect this soft creature from Earth. Such a bond could not be dismissed. It could only be tested. Nora asked what kind of test. Mevin's answer made her blood run cold. The trial of flame was ancient. Older than the treaties between clans. Older than the great wars that had shaped Skirath history. It was the way their ancestors had judged the worthy from the unworthy, before laws and councils and civilized debate. Nora would spend one night in the volcanic caldera without protection. No thermal suit. No filtration mask. No equipment of any kind. If she survived until sunrise, she would be considered clan-touched, worthy of the bond the hatchlings had formed with her. If she died, the hatchlings would be taken away and taught to forget her. Lieutenant Carver argued against it. He said that humans could not be subjected to alien trials. He said it was murder disguised as tradition. He was loud and angry and completely correct. Nora silenced him with a look. She understood what Carver did not. This was not about justice. This was about proving something to the Skirith, something that no amount of talking could prove. They needed to see with their own eyes that a human could endure what they endured. They needed to believe that the bond was real. She accepted the trial. The walk to the caldera took 2 hours. Mevin led the procession, with Nora following behind. The 3 hatchlings were carried in a ceremonial cage, crying out each time Nora moved out of their sight. Darrow walked at the rear, his expression unreadable. The caldera was a wound in the earth, a vast bowl of black rock surrounding a lake of molten stone. Heat rose from its depths in shimmering waves. The air smelled of sulfur and ash. Normal humans could not survive more than a few minutes at the rim without protection. Nora would be spending the entire night at the bottom. Mevin performed the ritual words. She spoke of fire and judgment, of bonds tested and proven. Her voice echoed off the crater walls like thunder. Then she told Nora to descend. Nora removed her cloak. She removed her boots. She stood in her simple clothing and looked down at the glowing hellscape below. The heat was already painful on her skin, and she had not even begun. Behind her, Bryn screamed. The gold hatchling threw herself against the bars of the cage, desperate to follow. Rhys and Kip joined her, their small voices rising in chorus. Nora did not look back. If she looked back, she would lose her courage. She began to climb down. The descent took nearly an hour. The rock was hot enough to blister her hands. She moved slowly, carefully, finding handholds in the jagged stone. Sweat poured down her face and evaporated almost instantly. Her lungs burned with each breath. She thought about Earth. She thought about her ancestors, the people who had crossed frozen tundras and burning deserts. Humans had survived ice ages. Humans had survived plagues. Humans had survived everything their dangerous world had thrown at them for 4 billion years. She was the daughter of survivors. She would not die here. She reached the bottom as the sun disappeared behind the crater rim. The world went dark except for the red glow of magma. The heat was unbearable, a physical pressure against her skin. Nora found a crevice in the rock, a slight depression that offered a few degrees of protection. She wedged herself into it and focused on controlling her breathing. Slow breaths, steady heartbeat. Conservation of energy. The hours crawled past. She drifted in and out of consciousness. She dreamed of snow, of cold water, of her mother's voice singing songs in a language she barely remembered. She dreamed of 3 small creatures pressing against her chest, seeking warmth that she freely gave. Sometime after midnight she stopped sweating. That was a bad sign. It meant her body was failing, unable to cool itself. Her core temperature was rising toward dangerous levels. She was going to die. She accepted this with strange calmness. She had made her choice. She had kept 3 lost children warm when they needed warmth. Whatever happened next, that choice had been the right one. She closed her eyes and prepared to let go. Then she felt something against her back. 3 small bodies pressed against her. 3 pairs of claws gripped her clothing. 3 small voices made sounds of comfort and determination. The hatchlings had escaped. They had flown into the caldera to find her. They could not save her from the heat. They were too small, too young. But they could do something else. They could absorb thermal energy into their own bodies. It was an instinct, something Skirith did naturally. They became living shields, pulling the killing warmth away from her skin. Nora wanted to tell them to go back. She wanted to protect them. But she was too weak to speak, too weak to push them away. So she held them close instead. The 4 of them waited together for the dawn. The first light of dawn touched the crater rim like a golden promise. Nora opened her eyes and saw the sky changing color, shifting from black to deep purple to the pale orange of morning. She was alive. Her body ached in ways she had never experienced. Her skin was red and raw. Her throat felt like she had swallowed sand. But her heart was still beating, and the 3 small dragons were still pressed against her. Rhys lifted his head and chirped weakly. His scales were dull from absorbing so much heat. Kip's damaged wing hung at an odd angle, stressed from the flight into the caldera. Bryn had not moved at all, her small body completely exhausted. They had given everything to keep her alive. Nora gathered them in her arms and began to climb. The ascent was harder than the descent. Her muscles trembled with each movement. Her vision blurred and cleared and blurred again. She fell twice, catching herself on the hot rock, adding new burns to the collection on her hands. But she did not stop. She could not stop. 3 small lives depended on her reaching the top. The Skirith were waiting at the crater rim. Mevin stood at the front, her ancient eyes fixed on the edge where Nora would appear. Behind her, Darrow and the warriors watched in silence. Even further back, the humans had gathered, Director Hemsley and Lieutenant Carver, and all the others who had come to witness the impossible. Nora's hand appeared first, gripping the rim. Then her head, her hair matted with ash and sweat. Then her shoulders, rising above the edge like a ghost climbing out of the underworld. She pulled herself over the rim and lay on the cool stone, breathing hard. The 3 hatchlings tumbled from her arms, too tired to move. No one spoke. Mevin walked forward slowly. Her footsteps were the only sound in the morning stillness. She stopped beside Nora and looked down at the human who had survived a trial meant for dragons. Then she did something that no Scarith had ever done for a human. She knelt. She lowered her great body to the ground and pressed her snout against Nora's forehead. It was the gesture of clan acceptance, the recognition of a bond that transcended species and tradition, and everything the Skirith had believed about the soft creatures from Earth. The warriors murmured in surprise. Darrow's expression twisted with emotions Nora could not read. Mevin rose and addressed the assembled Skirith. She spoke in their language, her voice carrying across the volcanic plain. Nora did not understand the words, but she understood the tone. It was the voice of authority, of decision, of change. When Mevin finished, she turned back to Nora and spoke in the common tongue. The trial was complete. Nora Webb of Earth had proven herself worthy. She would be granted the status of Clan Touched, the first human to receive such an honor. The 3 hatchlings would remain in her care, their bond recognized by Scarith law. Nora tried to speak. She tried to say thank you, or to express the overwhelming gratitude she felt. But her voice would not work. All she could do was nod. Dr. Yusuf rushed forward with a medical kit. He began treating her burns, his hands gentle and efficient. Lieutenant Carver brought water, which she drank in desperate gulps. The other humans surrounded her, their faces showing a mixture of relief and awe. Director Hensley stood apart from the group, watching with thoughtful eyes. He was already thinking about what this meant, about the doors that had opened, about the future that was now possible. Bryn stirred in Nora's lap. The gold hatchling opened her eyes and looked up at her human guardian. She made a small sound, almost like a question. Nora stroked her scales and whispered that everything was going to be okay. For the first time since she had found them in that storm, she believed it. The Skirith began to disperse, returning to their clan holdings with news of what had happened. The humans helped Nora back to the research station, supporting her weight when her legs threatened to give out. But Darrow remained at the crater rim, watching them go. His eyes followed Nora with an intensity that promised this was not over. The trial had been passed. But some fires were not so easily extinguished. 1 month passed on Ashfall. The burns on Nora's hands healed into pale scars. The hatchlings grew stronger, their scales hardening, their wings gaining power. And the relationship between humans and Skirith began to change in ways no one had predicted. Nora was invited to Skirith gatherings. She learned of their customs, their songs, their stories. She taught them about Earth in return, about the blue oceans and green forests, about the billions of humans who lived beneath a yellow sun. The hatchlings translated when words failed, bridging the gap between species with the pure simplicity of their bond. But not everyone welcomed the change. Darrow had gathered followers. Traditionalists who believed the old ways were sacred, who saw human contact as contamination. They met in secret, speaking of purification and restoration. They watched Nora with hatred in their eyes. The attack came during a ceremony. The Skirath were celebrating the turning of seasons, a festival of fire and flight. Nora attended as an honored guest, standing beside Mevin with the 3 hatchlings perched on her shoulders. For the first time, she felt truly accepted. Then Darrow stepped forward. He challenged Nora's right to be there. He called her an intruder, a corruption, a disease that would destroy everything the Skirith had built. He demanded that the council revoke her status and banish her from their lands. Mevin began to respond, but Darrow did not wait for words. He attacked. His massive body lunged toward Nora, claws extended, mouth opening to release a blast of superheated plasma. He was 3 times her size, armed with weapons she could not match. He expected her to run. She did not run. Before any adult Skirith could react, Riss launched himself at Darrow's face. The blue hatchling was still small, still young, but he flew with the fury of absolute determination. His claws raked across Darrow's eyes. His wings beat against the warrior's snout. Kip and Bryn followed their brother. 3 young dragons attacked a full-grown warrior, protecting their human guardian with everything they had. They could not defeat him. They knew they could not defeat him, but they fought anyway. Darrow roared in pain and confusion. He swatted at the hatchlings, trying to dislodge them without killing them. Even in his rage, even in his hatred, he could not bring himself to harm the young of his own species. That hesitation was his defeat. The other Skirith seized him. 6 warriors pinned him to the ground while Mevin's voice thundered across the gathering. She spoke of shame and betrayal, of a warrior who had attacked during a sacred ceremony, who had threatened the young of his own clan. Darrow was dragged away, his fate to be decided by the council, but the damage was done. Not to Nora, who stood unharmed with 3 exhausted hatchlings clutching her shoulders. The damage was to the old hatred itself. The gathered Skirith had seen something they would never forget. They had seen 3 of their own children choose a human over one of their greatest warriors. They had seen that the bond was real, not corruption or magic, but simple love tested by fire. Mevin approached Nora in the silence that followed. The ancient dragon looked at the human with something new in her eyes. Something that might have been respect. She asked Nora what she would do now. Nora thought about the question. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that first storm to this moment. She thought about 3 frightened creatures who had crawled beneath her cloak seeking warmth. She said she would stay. She would continue to build the bridge between their peoples. She would raise the hatchlings until they were grown, and then she would help them find their place in a changing world. Mevin nodded slowly, then she did something unexpected. She reached out with one massive claw and touched Nora's cheek, gentle as a falling leaf. She said that humans were strange creatures, soft and short-lived, fragile in so many ways. But they carried something the Skirith had forgotten. They carried warmth that had nothing to do with fire. That night, Nora sat at the edge of the caldera where she had nearly died. Riss curled at her feet, already larger than when she had first found him. Kip perched on a nearby rock, watching the stars. And Bryn pressed against her side, listening to her heartbeat just as she had on that first stormy night. The future was uncertain. There would be more challenges, more conflicts, more moments when everything seemed about to fall apart. But Nora was not afraid. She was a human. She came from a world that had tried to kill her ancestors for 4 billion years. She carried the warmth of all those survivors in her blood. And warmth, she had learned, was the most powerful force in the galaxy. She smiled and pulled her cloak around all of them. Some bonds could never be broken,